Namo, Sakyamuni, Buddhism. Hello everyone, Kwang today here, and today I'll be answering the question of why are there so many Buddhist traditions? Well, that's an excellent question, and I really get that question a lot, and it's a really good question to ask because it's not uncommon to kind of get lost in Buddhism sometimes, especially for new people or people who are curious about Buddhism. So there are a lot of Buddhist traditions. There's a lot of Buddhist schools, and that's kind of a good thing and kind of a bad thing. It's kind of a bad thing. I mean, it's not really a bad thing, but it's a thing because a lot of people, as I said, kind of get confused and they get lost, and they wonder why there's so many different schools of Buddhism or traditions of Buddhism. Is there a right one? Is there a wrong one? Is there a huge difference between this school and tradition and between this one? And to answer that is yes and no. There's a lot, all Buddhist traditions and schools have the same foundation, have the same kind of core teachings, like the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, Dependent Origination, Karma, Meditation, etc., etc. All these foundations are pretty much the core of Buddhism. So it's universal across all traditions and school of Buddhism to have that same teachings. There's a lot of traditions because the Buddha even told us, as Buddhism grows and as Buddhism kind of travels around, it has to meet the expectation, or not expectations, but it has to kind of evolve and adapt to the people and to the society. And that's the same way he taught, when he was in a different village or a town or whatever it may be, the way he taught depended on the people that was in his assembly. So basically the people he was teaching, he would look around, he would kind of analyze the situation, analyze the crowd, and kind of figure out, what their intellect was, what their capacity was to learn things. So based on that, he taught his discourses, his teachings. So if he thought they weren't that smart, or they didn't think they would believe him on a high level, then he would teach something simple and basic like karma or nirvana. And if they were more intellectual or more advanced kind of in the practice, then he would teach larger sutras. So, and that's kind of the structure of how there are different traditions. So you will probably never go to two countries and find Buddhism the exact same way. Even if you go to northern China and southern China, even though it's China, but they're completely different traditions, different schools, and different ways of doing things. And that's totally okay. There's nothing wrong with the different traditions. The traditions have to adapt to the people and the society. And in the very early years of Buddhism, as it kind of migrated to China and to other countries, Buddhism was rejected a lot. And so one way of kind of making it acceptable to people was kind of merging it into the local religion. And we see that a lot in China. We see a lot of folk religion kind of mixed in with Buddhism, and now you kind of see this Chinese Buddhism. And exact same thing in Tibet. And in Tibetan Buddhism, you have their Bon religion migrated with Buddhism. So you have almost a completely different form of Buddhism, which is still Buddhism, called Vajrayana Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism. And so as it went to different countries and different cultures and societies, it had to change. It had to adapt to the way people wanted to learn, to adapt to the way that people wanted religion or wanted liberation or heaven or whatever it may be. So that way, that's how we see, like Pure Line Buddhism, where Amitabha Buddha is their main Buddha. Or you go to Zen and, you have a very strict meditation practice, or any other tradition in school. There's literally dozens of them, and I don't even know all of them. So, there's too many, even for me to count. So there's no right and wrong tradition. There's no right and way to do things. The way people kind of choose Buddhism, especially in the West, because in the West, there's only really two popular forms of Buddhism: Tibetan Buddhism and Zen. And so those are really the two main things people are kind of exposed to the most. And there are so many other different traditions. And they're not wrong, they're just not adaptable to Western society. And Tibetan Buddhism has made that adaptability so not so I don't know how to explain it, but it's adaptable enough where it kind of attracted a lot of Westerners. And we have to thank the Dalai Lama for that as well. I love the Dalai Lama. I really want to personally meet him one day, but we get that popularity from Tibetan Buddhism because of him, which is not a bad thing. It's great because it's still a way of kind of spreading Buddhism and making people aware of Buddhism. And we have Zen because Zen is just, to real Zen is kind of this radical, not radical, but like this really strict practice of meditation and kind of and mindfulness and kind of just sitting and concentrating ridiculously hard on yourself and on your mind. But as it kind of came to the West, you will still find some places where that strictness is still there, but for the most part, it's very lenient. Most Buddhist centers I visited are not traditional Zen practices. They're not your normal, super strict Zen Buddhism, which is okay because for Westerners who, especially nowadays, are not very religious or not very, spiritual, they just kind of want something to help them. And Zen is that thing, but it's different. I don't even know how to explain it. I'm rambling at this point. Now I forget what my topic was. Oh yeah, the traditions. So every once in a while, and of course Theravada Buddhism, where we get a lot of Thai temples in the West. So and that's the third form of popularity so we have Theravada Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Zen. And we also see a lot of Chinese and Vietnamese temples. My temple is a Vietnamese temple. Chinese temples are usually very large and extravagant, which it's really beautiful to walk in and walk through, viewing the architecture and all the statues and all that good stuff. So, like I said, there's really no right or wrong tradition, and one way of kind of finding the correct that's not the right way of saying it. One way of kind of exploring the different traditions is really just visiting all the different temples or centers you have in your area. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to pick that one, or I really want this one. That's not kind of the way you would choose something, because although all the traditions and schools have the core teachings, that may not be their emphasis. Their way of thought would be their emphasis. So, for example, like Zen, meditation is their emphasis, or Pure Land Buddhism, Amitabha and Amitabha Sutra is their emphasis. And the same thing with all different traditions. So we can't really just, flip a coin and pick something. We really kind of have to discover it for ourselves. So if you have different types of Buddhism or temples in your area or near you, it's encouraged that you kind of visit all of them and see which one connects to you the most. My tradition, or the tradition of my temple, is Tiantai. I've never heard of Tiantai. Well, I won't say that. I really haven't read enough or discovered enough on Tiantai prior to going to that temple. I knew about it through studying and research, of course, but it's not something where I was like, that's the one I want. And so when I went to my temple and that just happened to be the tradition, then I kind of just stuck with it because it just made sense to me. It was what I connected with compared to any other school or tradition. So that's kind of the gist of it. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of key points, but if I am, feel free to go through my FAQs page on my website or just ask me in the comments. I'm sure I have a few post about the different traditions of Buddhism. So if I didn't answer something in particular you're looking for, do look at those posts. I may have already answered it. If not, feel free to ask me, and I will love to answer them for you. Thank you so much. Smile and be well. I'll be answering a question that I get a lot on Tumblr, my website. And the question is, do Buddhists pray? Or how do Buddhists pray?